for service, and if the fund reserve in any of these funds increases over 15%, I'd like to see a credit given back to fee payers. Considering McLean County and the town of Normal is kind of streamlining financially, I have two suggestions that might be considered before the budget process begins, and that has to do with the IMRF accelerated payments. The Supreme Court has done the ruling. Fiscal year 2016 was $400,000, and fiscal year 2017 is $232,000 for a total of $640,000. And I think that you should also look at the employee health insurance. I understand about pooling and how that works, but the public, the general public, has a higher deductible and pays much more of a premium. I do want to know if the salary and benefits are included in the fee, and I want to know what the 50% sales tax increase has been spent on. It was not earmarked like the mental health and the streets, so kind of where did it go? And I want to know how the $2.2 million is going to be repaid to the employee health savings account. Is my time up? Okay,
thank you. The next item on the agenda is consideration of approving the committee of the whole meeting minutes of August the 21st. Is there a motion?
I have an amendment to the minutes.
Mm-hmm. Please.
Item number 1 indicates, as does item number 2, that Mayor Terry Renner was absent, yet item number 3 says he called to receive public comment. So I think we need to check the calendar and if you ran the meeting or if you ran the meeting. I think you ran that
I believe
meeting.
So.
Yeah. But with that amendment, I would make a motion to receive the minutes as amended.
I have a motion with an amendment from Alderman Bray. Second? And second by Alderman Painter. Any other comment? I guess I do have a vote, don't I, Scott? Okay. It's still not up. All right, okay. And I didn't vote yet. Yay. Diana, did you vote?
No, I still think Terry was at that meeting.
Oh, okay. Passed 8-0. There are no nays to announce. All right. And now we turn to the presentation and discussion of our unfunded general capital projects, including a conversation about available and alternate funding sources. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Mr. Rasmussen.
Thanks, and I'm going to turn it over to Patty Lynch.
Okay.
To see you guys and talk about capital. Love it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of go off the exhibits you have in the packet, and what we've tried to do is just kind of give you a refresher on both the unfunded and funded parts of the capital budget. So as you can see on the first slide, we kind of have the enterprise and non-enterprise, and I have the specific projects that belong in each, but just quickly on the one slide where you have the enterprise that's funded, you can see a large portion of that is water. It's about $22 million. If that was spent, that would be their entire fund balance that's been accumulating over all these years. And we probably want to keep 15% of that, but it's a good start, but again, their needs are probably much greater. In the sanitary sewer area, which, I'll hold off talking about because there's another presentation happening tonight, but there's some projects going forward, but it certainly doesn't meet the need of capital maintenance. And then on unfunded, water would like to do more. Sanitary sewer is going to be, that maintenance that we're not quite hitting right now. Let me just scroll. All right, now just scroll. Okay, so this is what we're talking about tonight. David wanted to kind of bring to you some of the non-enterprise fund capital projects or capital projects that don't have necessarily a line of sight with a user fee. Is probably a better way to look at it. So if you look at the 5-year funded non-enterprise fund capital, you can see the library has, that's funded. The library has some money that they've been saving year over year for the expansion of the library. That bulk there would be design costs. Under facilities, we have some money budgeted that is mandatory ADA type items for the Coliseum. Parks is using the Creativity Center money to do the work at the BCPA, and there's a little bit of money for some fire. What's not funded, which kind of gets lost in the shuffle because we talk about enterprise a lot, and we have streets kind of going, and I have a slide on that, are some of the other things that are out there. And the library, obviously, that would include their estimate for an expansion. The Park and Rec would include an aquatic center and Lincoln Leisure Center. Facilities includes an operations center. These are items that staff has identified in a 5-year plan. This is nothing that council has decided, but just needs that are out there. Also, what would be in there, and I can't quite remember where, it's kind of a downtown, some downtown dollars. So the question with these guys are, if we don't have a specific user fee for these types of capital needs, where do you look? And, that's where you get into your general taxation. It's sales tax, it's property tax, it's local motor fuel tax, like our gas tax. As a home rule unit of government, we have a lot of authority to fund projects through general taxation, and we have experienced some of that together, and a lot of that's been used to earmark for some capital, like streets, some policy decisions, such as funding mental health, and then we also had some deficit issues that we've been dealing with, so that's kind of where those things go, but where that large tax increase went. But these needs are out there, and so we're just trying to start the discussion on, where would we look to possibly fund some of those.
Patty Lynn, could you,
Yes.
while you mentioned our structural deficit, could
Yes.
you put some dollars around that?
So we're in the process of updating numbers, but roughly for 19, if you include the impact of the new state fees on the tax, it's about 1.6 million, but
In FY18?
in
or
FY19.
19.
FY18, if you recall, we were going to be to the good because they were going to double pay something in the first year. So we're a little bit ahead if things hold. It's a little early in the year, but for 19, we're looking at about 1.6. Now, the question becomes is it 1.6 without having any capital maintenance in it? That's kind of the question we're asking.
If we do nothing at all, it's 1.6.
So the only capital that's going through in that regard would be for the dedicated resource for roads. So, and that's about $4.8 million.
That's
So
from the sales tax.
it's from the sales tax, and then you have the local 4-cent tax, if you remember.
Right.
Those two
Correct.
combined are about $4.8 million. So if we don't have any revenue, that is, once we earmark it, we don't spend it on anything else. So
Right.
those funds are set aside for streets. That's why that's going forward. If we can find any money elsewhere, we try to squeak out some funds like we did in this year's budget. We have the health insurance to get some facilities needs taken care of over at the arena. But that regular maintenance for, say, facilities across the entire city, lots of items are just not in the budget, and that's kind of been the way we've been budgeting, and it's really a policy decision for the council to say, maybe our deficit is bigger. Maybe our deficit should have $1 million or $2 million a year for facilities, or, if we can't afford to pay cash for capital, maybe we should be looking at some debt service for a bond. We don't, debt is not necessarily a bad thing when rates are still at a historic low, regardless of the rate increases that we're having. I'm not suggesting, we go out and issue all kinds of debt, but, debt is a very useful tool for municipalities who have really gotten to the point through no fault of your own where, kind of the infrastructure is just aging out. The policy decision is capital maintenance going to be a discretionary part of the budget or not? And if it's not, then how can we maybe phase in or jumpstart or get something going for not just basic infrastructure, but also building the tax base, which is critical to us, and many more streets that we need. So, and speaking of streets, that's a great segue into this,
Okay, nice
this next
segue.
slide. I planned that. So what you see there is, again, that $4.2 million of funded streets is $25 million of that is those earmarked funds. So in 5 years' time, you would do $25 million worth of streets if the taxes hold, regardless of any potential Streets 2.0. I think what that means to the entire city, I think, is a fairly small drop in the bucket. There's a lot of work that Jim and his crew are doing, but if you look around the city, and I'm so grateful for the for the roads that are being done, but I'm sure you guys can see now that it doesn't get us too far. Also, the concern about the underground utilities, which just going to leave that there. And then the other part of the funded is the state motor fuel tax that we have accumulated over the years, which is slated for projects such as Fox Creek and Hamilton Bund to Commerce and some streetlights and things of that nature. But you can see the unfunded is bigger. Now, I was looking at that today, and I realized at some point I put in the unfunded $30 million for Streets 2.0. Now, again, that's not a council decision. That was something that I was just kind of looking at, so we went big and we put in, $30 million. Jim will probably want to kill me. I don't know if we can do that, but it's a 5-year plan. So if you can do roughly $8 million a year, you can get there. So that's streets. So moving forward, these are just some of the projects that I've heard a lot about as a finance director and as a citizen, and I think these are all great projects. There isn't anything I can say about any of them. I think they're all needed for whether it be quality of life or re-energizing the downtown or expanding the library. But this is they all kind of fall into that caveat taxation. And how would we strategically use that to further maybe some of these projects that we really can't afford to do. For instance, I don't know, let's take one. Let's go with, O'Neill Pool is estimated maybe, aquatic center would be great for quality of life. Kids would love it, and we'd have something really positive going on. It's about $10 million. So the question is, could we cut something in order to pay for that? But that's $10 million. That is literally bigger than the entire Parks Department's annual budget. And we have so many parks that we have to maintain. If you think about just the lawn mowing and the lining and the seeding and, the tree trimming and everything that they do, not to mention the programs they provide. So just to put it into context, could we cut something out of there in cash? It would be very difficult to do that. Could we issue a bond? Yes, we could issue a bond. But if you look at all of these projects, that's too much debt. But just kind of wanted to leave you with a visual on, how do we start this conversation of things that don't have the obvious user fee. So two of our biggest tax in the city is property tax. As you know, the city hasn't raised its property tax rate in over 6 years. You can see our rates there in comparison to some of our neighbors, both in total overlapping rates and the city direct rates. Our sales tax, you can see kind of how we fall in with our peers. So when I start looking at these things, that's the first question I ask is, how do we fall in with our peers? You don't want to price yourself out of the market. Certainly, we're always thinking of the citizen, but as how about our city's credit rating? Where do we fall in? Is there any room, barring any strategic, massive elimination of a department or, I think it's always that hybrid approach. This is kind of the funding gap, again, that you were asking about, Karen, and, just to restate, that 1.5 is really getting us to the same budget we have right now today, where I think we've come to you with a couple of budget amendments already. So let's pretend the 18 budget, we balanced it. So, do we want to start putting placeholders in there for facilities, even if it's small, begin to start building those dollars in there. In 18, we actually absorbed $1 million in debt service savings. So, when we were talking about before using that savings, if you kept debt service at $6 million a year always and then backfilled with debt to use that savings to issue other bonds, because of the structural deficit, we're kind of absorbing it before you guys ever get a chance to really use it. So that would be a strategic question, is do you leave your debt service at $6 million annually and then you're able to issue bonds back to it? But if it has to be absorbed, regardless of a deficit, I guess that would be potentially another way to do that. That really concludes at least what we wanted to bring to your attention and start a conversation about. So I'm here for any questions that you might have.
Alderman Burgess.
I do have a couple questions. So when we're looking at the numbers on sanitary sewer, I assume those numbers do not, in terms of unfunded, funded, do not include any projections based on what we may or may not would do with fees?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
As far as a list of projects, we received the master list. Has there been any narrowing since then?
When you say the master list, are you talking about the word cloud that on this?
No,
or
I mean, originally when we got all those handouts, we were getting the presentations on the CIP and all the different
Yes.
projects that could end up in it.
Yes.
Are we still looking at that the whole full list? Has there been any narrowing?
If you're talking about the draft capital improvement plan, we're refining it to what the departments have updated through the 2018 budget, but there has been no narrowing.
We've not done the prioritization exercise yet.
Yeah, I was wondering if we were going to see that whole list again and then prioritize, because I know we'd made some initial comments and I didn't know if anything was done based on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important conversation for us to have to help Patty Lynn and others do their work.
Yes.
Okay, and then my last question is, so it looks like there's around $80 million in funded projects, 220 in unfunded.
Mm-hmm.
Is staff making any recommendation yet in terms of what a full CIP budget might look like, what might be inappropriate, or do you need a lot more feedback before you can do
You
that?
mean a fully funded or a full ask of what they need?
A full
right now?
ask that's that we all
Yeah.
know is grounded in reality, what we can actually achieve.
So I think we really need you guys to prioritize that for us. People are very passionate about all their areas, and if you ask them, hey, what could you cut out? What do you need in the next 5 years? And then, hey, go back and refine that. I think they'd need you to help us with that, because yeah.
Alderman Matthey.
Thank you. So I might have missed it, but I haven't seen an update yet where we are with our funding of our police and fire pensions. I know that we were on an accelerated payment schedule to try to get ahead of all those payments. Are we still on track? Is that included in all these numbers? Or, I mean, we're still good there that that's getting taken care of?
Yes, we are. So again, that was council action to fund the plans that way. So we wouldn't deviate from that. In all of those numbers you see up there is the full funding of the police and fire pensions and any other earmarked monies such as the roads.
Okay,
Yep.
I assumed it
That's
was
a great
so, but I
question.
just wanted to
Yeah,
make sure.
that's good to point out too.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Mwambwe.
Patty, sorry.
Yes.
Where does our reserve stand, general fund reserves?
So I was going to give you an update upcoming at a next meeting, but at the end of April, we have about 15% fund balance, and we did finish the year with a modest surplus. It's about 15 million. Yes.
Other comments or questions at this point? Alderman Black?
Thank you. Thank you, Patty Lynn, for your work on this project. As I look at this graph in particular, it's giving me flashbacks to the summer of discontent of the Budget
Yes.
Task Force and
having
having to deal with all of that. And when we go to the word map, we see a lot of things that residents want. And we did, the community development plan. We had 8,000 people involved in that. They're bringing on Bloomington. I mean, those are the sorts of things that people are looking for, and they're kind of looking to us to make that happen. But when you see graphs like this, numbers like that, things have to go get pushed by the wayside. So I guess mine's more common for my colleagues is that, I remember when we had that conversation with the Budget Task Force, there was also the notion that we would have a circle back and start talking about some cuts and what we were not going to be in the business of. And I don't ever remember that ever really getting the legs
I think you're right.
that I think some of us had hoped that it would. And I'll just, as a general comment, looking at the fee increases for sewers and stormwater and looking at a lot of the things that we're talking about, I feel like it's just pieces of the puzzle, and I would almost prefer, like, when we do the full vote in March, and we'll be seeing some more of the budget calendar looking forward, that it includes all of those things at once, because it's very hard for me to say, let's do a fee increase on stormwater, or sewers, but yet I don't know how that's going to necessarily impact the back end. So when we talk about priorities, I look at that as more of a function of us thinking holistically about the budget, which right now I'm not comfortable saying yes or no to anything until we see the whole picture. And maybe that, I think the solution at this point in time is probably going to be a combination of all of the things, cuts, probably some debt service, probably some fee increases, but I can't speak to what that looks like specifically until we see the whole package at once. And if we start it now, we have retreat between now and then, a number of committee of the wholes. We got a lot of the back end work done with the capital improvement project and plan. I think that we can actually do a lot of really good work that points these things out, can be strategic, and then make a good decision for 5 years down the road. And then I'm way more comfortable saying to residents and explain to them, okay, your fee increase is here, but here's what happens in the back end, and you can get that wave pool at O'Neill Pool or whatever that might be. So,
Completely agree with you. Thank you. Could you just speak to the sales tax increase? We had Donna Bolin ask that question. So
Yes, it was a great question.
Remind everybody where that money is going.
So of the 1% that we adopted, a quarter point went directly to street resurfacing program.
Okay.
A quarter point went to the county for the expansion of the jail for the mental health program. And then the 50% that was left went into the general fund. And that's what we tried in year one to fund some capital projects, some facilities, but essentially it went into operations.
Okay.
In the general fund. But there was a $7.4 million deficit, if you recall.
They're not hearing in the background, in the back.
I'm sorry. Can I? Is this better?
Yeah,
Okay, so sorry. I'm
that
sorry.
little summary there.
I feel like
that's
it's
helpful.
close, but then, okay. So of the 1% sales tax, a quarter point went to strictly the streets resurfacing program. Another quarter point went to the jail expansion for mental health. And then the 50% that was left went into the general fund to help with the deficit. Just to caveat that, though, cuts were made that year, and there was a $7.5 million deficit. So it didn't all just kind of flow in. There was capital equipment that went forward. There was capital projects went forward in year one.
And just to underscore what Scott said about our summer of discontent, what this graph that we're looking at here includes that 50% of the sales
Yes,
tax.
it does.
And our sales tax is, if we're lucky, it's steady, but it sounds like it's been going down.
Well, the first trip is we have a $500,000 hit that goes to the state for processing that. So that's included in the FY19 estimate. So we now pay, the state now withholds about $500,000 a year. In addition to that, I'm watching the commodities market. It's not over until it's over, but we should use caution with those revenues. So many of our revenues are really consumer behavior based. And as you know, we don't receive anything really for internet, for people shopping online. That's a large concern going forward. My understanding is still only 20% of all sales nationally are online, which seems really low to me. But I feel like I do so much online. But that was something that was brought up recently, and that kind of surprised me. But on top of that, you've got commodities market. It's like investing in the stock market almost. If flour goes down, everything that you make with flour is affected by that. If dairy is down, if beef and poultry are down. So almost every tax we have is a portfolio of other things, like it's, a stock or other portfolio. Even the property tax, we have all different types of properties. It's the same type of thing. If a certain segment goes bad, then, it's more rock solid, the property tax. But
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? All right, well, I think there's more to come on this
Okay.
conversation.
And I appreciate that. And if I could just comment, Scott, David has asked that we do kind of a full pre-budget discussion with you. I think that is slated for the Committee of the Whole in October, at least at this point, which I think is a great idea. It's before your retreat. It's before the tax levy and other things. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
And for the public, too.
Yes.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Karen, can I add something real quick?
Yes, please.
Just regarding the internet thing, I just read an article this afternoon that there's two bills regarding internet sales that are going on right now. One is called the Fairness in the Marketplace Act, and that's a pro-collecting sales tax from individual municipalities. And it's been sitting out there for like 3 years and hasn't been voted on it. There's actually a new bill, though, in the House right now that is designed to block the collection of any sales taxes from anywhere where you don't have a physical brick and mortar location. So it's the opposite bill has actually been introduced into the House. So just as an update, I just read it earlier this afternoon. So that's the exact opposite of what we need, I think. But
Thankfully, Congress is known for its swift, decisive action, so we'll have to see what comes out of it.
Right.
If I could make a short plug, Karen, people are required to, on their taxes, disclose what they have purchased on the internet and pay those taxes, and those would come to the city. So
Right.
I think a lot of people don't know that, to be honest. It's a fairly new phenomenon, and even if you estimate, we would love to have it. Thank you.
10%, huh? Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. And now we'll turn to the proposed sanitary and storm sewer rates. And I think we have an updated sheet in front of us that will appear on the screen.
Right now.
All right. So when we left off last time, we were having a conversation about whether we looked at an increase that was steady over quite a long period of time, or whether we accelerated it. And I think we'd ask you to come back with some different models.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Could I just add one thing? One of the things that we were trying to do is get some kind of a consensus here, if we could, tonight, so that we would know what we would put on the agenda for next time. Now, if possible, we would just put two options on there for the council to choose, but if you can decide tonight, we'll know how to word it for the next meeting.
I'm sorry, so that to enable the funding of this?
Yes, we have two options here, and we'll put one of them on the agenda for you the next time, or if you would prefer, we'll just put two of them on. If you have one that you'd like us to put on, then you can vote that one up or down, or we'll put two of them on the agenda next time, and you can decide at that time which one you might want, or neither one. But
Well,
that's,
I guess I'm reflecting on the conversation we just had, thinking about this holistically. And are you suggesting that we go ahead and vote on a rate increase outside of that bigger conversation?
we were hoping that we could put this on agenda for a rate increase or of one of these options or not at an upcoming city council meeting.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to some conversation about that. But anyway, go ahead. please.
Okay. Thank you, City Council. So with this ongoing conversation, we've had going for about 5 years. So we have been having a long dialogue about sewers. This is I won't even really have a presentation for you tonight. What we wanted to do, we've presented this to death. So what we wanted to do is really have the modified option that was requested last time. So again, what we've talked about is the council passed 2 years ago the sewer master plan. It recommended funding levels. We are suggesting that the council move forward with action on the enterprise fund for both the storm and sanitary. And the reason being is those are separate. Just a recollection, they're separate than the general fund. The spending that comes out of those they're user-based fees that go directly to the service provided. And so that's the reason why we're asking, as staff, we're asking for consideration outside of even that larger dialogue of how everything plays together. Sewers are foundational to everything above that. And so when they fail, so many, it's a public health issue. What we're talking to you tonight about is a public health issue. So up on the screen, and for those that have this sheet in front of you, the two options that we're discussing are a 5-year rollout of 11.6% a year for our sanitary sewer rates, and for our stormwater rates, an 8.2% increase over 5 years. That was what was presented to you last Monday night. Tonight, we wanted to present to you a modified rate that would allow for year one for those rates to be put into place, and then we would have, again, that same ongoing 3% moving forward. The reason why we would look at an option with a more aggressive rate increase is the fact that there's a lot of need out there. This isn't a problem that is it can wait. There's a lot of people that right now today have a lot of need, and by waiting, it's important for me to just as a staff convey to you that even if you do the immediate rollout, it is not as if year one you have all of the projects done. That the funding has to build up. You have to have the staffing available to be able to provide those improvements. And so what we've said is, the last time we rolled this out to you, we said in that 6 to 8 year time frame, if you did over 5 years, to allow the rates to start hitting that tipping point where we can start truly seeing a difference in this community. If we do that with that immediate rate increase, we will start to see more of those changes in the 3 to 4 year time frame. So again, there's a tolerance, we understand, but for the immediate rate increase for stormwater, it would be a 30% first year rate increase. For the sanitary sewer, it would be a 50% rate increase, and then that 3% after that. Again, the communities can approach this differently. The town of Normal did something a little bit more aggressive because they were trying to get ahead of that. They wanted to have their sewers televised in that first 5 years. That's our goal as well, either way. But what we wanted to do is, I thought I would actually just take an opportunity to show you a video that I don't know that the council has seen before. It is just so important to stress that this is a public health issue. We have in basements right now. I mean, this is on a combined sewer. This is a video sent to us from a citizen. I wanted to read you some of the different comments that we received from our citizens. I won't provide names or addresses, but I think it's important for you to hear that there's a lot of people out there. One says, our biggest concern is the odor of sewer gas that significantly permeates whether there is any backup that happens monthly, and this very strong and noxious smell. And then others says, this is a huge problem for us. Our basement's flooded 5 times since 2003 when we purchased the home. It's cost us thousands of dollars. The previous owner's experience was similar. Others talk about the stagnant, standing water that's impeding the massive amount of cattails. Their area has been warned of mosquito activity, and they're concerned about West Nile virus. Another one's talked about the manhole right out in front of their house that has sewer that's poured out of it. There's so much water backed up that the manhole that is lifted up and off and into the street. And so they're just asking for additional help. Others talk about when we have heavy rains, these Lowe's, Menards, Best Buy, Best Buy doesn't sell sump pumps, but, well, they have sump pumps, they listed that in there, sell sump pumps, they sell out. This is a citywide issue. Put tax money towards addressing this issue. The reason I wanted to say this to you is I know we'll hear from a lot of folks about the negative impacts of raising fees. It's important as a council to know we've done citywide surveys, and every ward in this community is affected. Whenever we looked at that, it is a major impact for our community. Just as a reminder, that we had looked at. We had done an overall city-wide survey, and the dots on this were the people that were concerned about flooding, sewer, sanitary storm, all of that. It isn't a downtown issue. It's not a near east side, near west side. This is a citywide issue. So we're just, tonight, I'm asking for your continued dialogue and support for us to move forward and start fixing this problem. We have to go from being reactive to proactive in our community. So at this point, just ask if you have any questions on this issue.
I actually have one question, and I believe Donna Bolin raised it, and we talked about this a little bit last week. I believe this plan calls for 9.75 FTE additional people.
It does.
Staff. Is that in the funding matrix for this?
It is, not in the first 5 years, but over the 20-year period it is. And we think that's critical. We've talked about before that it is not all in 1 year. We can't afford that. But you have to ramp up that hybrid model of both, additional contracting and additional staff. Even contracting takes effort from an internal perspective. So it's unrealistic for us to think you can include staff. Last presentation we gave you last week showed and laid that out for you.
I understand about, personal opinion here, I certainly understand about the need to add people to something, particularly the more aggressive we are. But I also have concerns about us adding people to our payroll and our pensions, and I wonder if this is not an opportunity for us to change our philosophy a little bit about how we do some of this work.
As a council, you're always welcome to make that. The funding level provides us the ability to make those decisions. Right now, we have no decisions.
Right, gotcha. Comments, questions? Alderman Sage and then Howman.
And Jim, thank you. And maybe to tag on a little bit, first of all, I have to say, so last week it was the sheet metal wall, and this week it was this, and so
I can bring the toilet
worried
back up
about.
if you'd like.
I'm a little worried about what's next week. Perhaps alderman in a dunk tank or something. I'm not sure. So again, back to the earlier conversation, right? I mean, at least what I heard a few people suggesting was that this is going to be about prioritization. Is that there may be some aldermen who will say, yeah, perhaps I can support this. I'm not suggesting that's going to be me, but I'm saying as long as there are some offsetting reductions elsewhere. And see, that's going to be part of the hard conversation we're going to have because, staff has done, I believe, an outstanding job over the last couple, 3 years. The council's all known that this was on its way, right? We knew that when the sales tax increase was passed, and we've known that for the last couple of years. To Scott's point, there was no serious council conversation about reducing expenses. So now that's all coming to critical mass now. So again, back to Karen's comment, I think, in reply to something that Steve said and some others have suggested, is this idea of looking at everything kind of in total, and to try and understand what is the ultimate ask that would be suggested that the council would have to make on the taxpayers to cover a structural deficit in the general fund, these enterprise funds and so forth. So I think that's a really good conversation that, quite honestly, we could have been having. We didn't, but now the time's upon us, right? It's going to have to be part of this budget cycle. There won't be any of this, again, that I've seen recently where we have a desire to do that, but somehow then we never do that, and then we get to the point, well, we just have to do something. We just have to pass this budget, and that's just something that's a concept of philosophy that I know I won't be able to buy into this year. So hopefully we can, as I think Karen suggested and others, we have enough time to do this in a systematic manner.
Right.
Let's make sure we have the will to do it.
Right, which isn't saying that this is not critical, because I think we all recognize it's critical.
Yeah.
But how does it fit into the bigger plan?
Right.
Yeah. Alderman Howman.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. We talk about wants and needs, and my first question would be, if we wait 3 to 4 months for a more strategic view, what would happen to the plan going forward?
Well, if I'm being honest, there won't be a decision in 3 or 4 months. It's a larger dialogue. And so the real concern from a staff perspective is that there's needs right now. And even for this rate increase, right now, we're suggesting May 1st of 2018. That's even a concern from a staffing perspective because, that's whenever just the funds start changing. And so, one thing that's important as we talk about our overall philosophy as a city is the different pots of funds and how you prioritize those. Whenever you looked at what again, my thanks to Patty Lynn and her assistants through this whole process and her staff, but, you have to compartmentalize this. There's needs and wants in the general fund. There's needs and wants in the water fund. There's needs and wants in the different types of funding. And so from a prioritization standpoint, I would ask again, I understand they all come to your bill. You all have to pay that on your water bill. But in the end, those should be, as I think Donna Boland, even our citizen, pointed out, there was one point when money was taken, I believe it was for resurfacing, as I recall, and it was paid back, but it was one of those issues that that's not supposed to happen. That took council action. Enterprise funds are supposed to go where they're at. And so that's why, again, we just ask for your consideration now to take action because it's just an immediate need.
I think we have, in at least the 3 years now that I've been on council, we have been more tactical, and okay. I'm getting a sense on the council now that we have a will to be more strategic and look at the bigger picture. And so part of me says, let's go forward with this because we have friends in the far northwest suburbs of Chicago who had the toilet running over like this after a big rain, and anyway, it's Sarah offered to come down and be a testimonial when we got to this point that we need to do something, not to wait, that based on what happened in her neighborhood, the whole neighborhood was had flooded basements, and it wasn't a pretty thing. So part of me wants to say, let's do this now. Let's make the decision now. But the other, because we are leaning towards being more strategic, I'm willing to postpone it and hope that we don't see any more of the toilets you just had up on the screen, which I know.
To clarify, we're still talking about May of 2018, whether we would vote next week or whether we vote a month from now, right?
True. That is true unless council decided. In the past, rate increases can happen on January 1st, other times as well. So if as a council you saw the need as well for an immediate action, that can happen December 1st, January 1st. That is your decision to make. We were trying to start that at a new fiscal year. But I also would like to point out some comparable data. There was 79 communities in the state of Illinois that were reached out to for survey data. Bloomington, out of, and you can see where my cursor is at, for sewer rates, for monthly sewer charges, we were 78 of 79, and one being the most expensive. So we were the second cheapest for our rates for sewers. And so again, that is, you can see there are all the different communities in here that were sent this data. But I think it's important, and again, Normal was right by us before they passed their sewer rate. We were 78, they were 77. And so the two of us together had lower sewer rates. We are just saying that comparable to other communities, and that's not even fair. You have to deal with our own issues. But we have older sewers. We have 1,800 sewers we're trying to deal with. And so that's why we're just, again, asking for more urgent action.
Alderman Black and then Burgess.
I guess then, thank you, and thank you again. My question, we've kind of danced around it, is this would take effect if we were to pass something, whether we do it in October, December, or even March of next year, it would take effect on May, the May billing cycle. Is that correct?
Currently, yes.
Right. So, I'm not denying any of the things that you've showed us, but I'm just saying that my worst case scenario would be that we pass something, say, in October, November, heck, we even do December, and then we don't have the capital to handle some of the political capital to handle some of the other things that are coming along with the whole budget for next year and the next capital improvement project. So this is why I'm advocating for, if we do it, let's just do it. I'm looking at the calendar now as part of the budget adoption. if that makes, because it doesn't impact staff at all. We'd just be sitting doing nothing. We wouldn't be collecting that revenue between now and whenever that ordinance would pass through May. So whether we do it in March or we do it now, to me it's the same thing. I'd rather do it as part of a larger conversation with the budget process.
Thank you. Member Burgess.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand. This is an enterprise fund. You said that a couple times. So is it correct, though, that no matter what we do with the general fund or any cuts or changes there, those decisions will have zero impact on this fund and our ability to begin chipping away at our sewer stormwater needs? Is that correct?
Absolutely accurate.
So
Yes.
this is a very compartmentalized decision.
Yes.
This is, yeah, I mean, from a financial point of view, this is a compartmentalized decision. And I'm looking back at my notes and from the meeting minutes. We discussed this on December 14, 2015 at a committee of the whole. And at that committee of the whole nearly 2 years ago, we said we want to move forward on increasing sewer stormwater fees. And staff said, okay, we'll bring you something back next week. And that didn't happen. And I don't remember why it didn't happen. It's not staff's fault. But I suspect it was similar to this conversation today where we said, well, we need more time. We want to contemplate it more. We want to look at the bigger picture. And here we are almost 2 years later. Our problems have not gone away, and this decision will not get any easier by delaying it. I think, to me, the need is so apparent, and this decision, because it is so compartmentalized, I think we need to address it as soon as possible and then move on to the other pressing issues that we have to deal with.
Thank you. Alderman Painter and then Sage. Oh, and Matthew. I think Jamie was first. Right, Alderman Matthew. Matthew, Painter, Sage.
So I actually would agree with Amelia on this one. That, you know, the South Hill neighborhood in particular, back in Oak Street, I think that the story of the manhole cover getting lifted up and moved out of the way is from Oak Street back in there. There's some serious areas back in there where, you know, we've got a 120-year-old sewer system or older, and those people, like you said, it's the foundation of everything else we're going to talk about. If we can't fix the foundation, how can we even talk about the streets and everything else on top of it? And, you know, I agree. I think this is something we can just say, it has to happen. It's been pushed off for years, and it's something we can move forward with. I don't know that if from a foundational level, it's going to really, or I'm going to be willing to push this off to talk about other things that are even capital improvements, because this is, you know, everything is predicated on the sewer system. So I would rather move forward on this sooner than wait until April and just get this off the plate and move on to the next thing.
Okay.
Thanks.
Alderman Painter.
Thank you. I would like to move on aggressively as well. When I spoke with you last week, you said that if we had the full amount, which was 312 million, something like that?
136 million.
Pardon?
136 million over 20 years.
Okay. How about if we aggressively paid for it in 3 years, maybe tacking the fee on a sliding scale, kind of like people's property taxes, use that same formula, get all the money in 3 years and just do it. And you said you could do it in 5 to 8 years if we had all that money up front. And I know that that would be probably very unpopular, but we would have it taken care of. And at the end of 3 years, we could drop the rates right back down to where they are now, and I think people would trust us.
Thank you.
Anyway.
And there are some good comments that are being made. Again, I'll go back to what I've said before. It's about the total ask that we're going to ask people to increase money coming out of their pocket. And so to say, and again, Jamie makes a good point, and I know this is something important to him, this foundational aspect. But I think it's important for us to remember that only in government do we compartmentalize. When I budget at home, I have to look at the total budget. I look at mortgage, utilities, dining, repair, everything. And so that if I increase something over here, one of two things has to happen. Either I have to decrease over here, or I have to get a part-time job and increase my incoming revenue. So I get a little concerned when I hear that we're just going to do this compartmentalized, a piece at a time, because then at the end of all of those pieces, it's a significant total increase on the tax burden that we put on our citizens. And I think we just need to be sensitive to the fact that that's exactly the kind of process that has gotten us to the place where we are today. And that I would caution about being. I'm sorry, I've been here long enough to know that it's always easier to vote to spend money now and promise to cut expenses later. Only somehow we never seem to get around to cutting those expenses. And so I think we ought to be cautious as we proceed down that, because this is not simply a compartmentalized project or an expense. This is part of a larger total aggregated cost that the taxpayers will have to give more of their money to the government to cover.
Alderman Wallenby.
Okay, thank you. I love the video, by the way. And maybe that's what we should use for the Alderman dunk tank, that water. For next week.
Oh, come on.
Wow.
Well, I recognize that the issues are very important, and I think, any other time I would be for a very aggressive plan, even to fix it next year. But, at the same time, when it's other people's money, I'm always very cautious about that. I do remember that when we talked about pension funding, we talked about this concept of intergenerational equity, to make sure that we don't charge some people more on the front end than those we would charge later down the line, 20 years later, and that's what makes me a little bit hesitant. And I know it's a little different, sewers, it's public health, and all of that. But it makes me a little bit hesitant. I would want a more measured approach, but also, trust your expertise, because if you brought this measured approach, halfway, maybe not halfway, but a measured approach, you probably know that it can still be done without jeopardizing people's public health. I also, and I lost my train of thought, long weekend, so it's not going to come back. So, but that's kind of what I'm thinking of at this moment, is that now I remembered, and kind of going back to what Alderman Sage was saying, I'm also considering the fact that we're not the only body that's going to increase fees or taxes or anything like that. There are others. So in terms of looking at the totality of people's property tax bills, sales taxes, and other fees, I always keep that into consideration, is that at the end of the month, when people have all their bills that they're having to face, I want to be sure that people feel like they can meet all their obligations, without too much frustration. So those are the thoughts that are going through my mind at this time.
Thank you. Alderman Bray.
Well, thank you, Jim, very much for your presentation and for going back and crunching these numbers again. I think we've talked here about the fact that this involves public health as well as our infrastructure. Those are two top priorities for me. I hear about that from my constituents a great deal. And for that reason, as top priorities, I don't really see this as something that we bargain away later, especially when I look at these numbers. The typical residential bill will go up $6 a month. It's so that's quite nominal. And when I think about the fact that our city, the list of cities that you gave shows that we're way at the bottom, but we know that as far as I'm quite certain that the budgets for these other cities are probably smaller than our budgets. So it just shows that we haven't put a priority on something that we probably should have. And finally, I'll just say that we know that it's cheaper to maintain these sewers than it is to fix them when they collapse. And I like Jamie's comments about getting the streets done, but first you have to take care of what's underneath. And for that reason, I would favor an expedited approach here, making this a priority and saying that, yes, this is a priority in our community. For this bang for the buck, we can get this done, and then other things may have to be traded off, but we know that this was an important priority and we took care of it. So thank you.
So I think, Steve, what you're looking for is some direction from us about whether we should bring something back to vote on next week. And so I think we ought to do a straw poll here. And also, if we want to vote on it next week, are we looking at an immediate increase or a more extended or a lower increase over more time? Is that correct?
Yes, that's essentially right. And what we've been talking about, I think Alderman Burgess captured it very well. We've been looking at this for a couple of years now, and the problem keeps getting worse, and we would like to know at what time the council would like us to bring this back to you on one of these options or the other, and of course we think sooner would be better than later.
Couple points of clarification. I think I wrote down, Jim, that if the immediate increase would it accelerate this to a 3 to 4 year time frame to really get past the hump, so to speak.
That is accurate.
And the increase over time, what's that time frame?
6 to 8 years. And so instead of the 3 to 4, it's really double that amount of time to get past that tipping point.
And if we had a majority of us looking to vote on this next week, it still doesn't take effect till May the 1st.
Unless you ask for it to take effect January 1st. We could do that as well.
Okay, so we'd have to specify that. But right now, the way it stands, it's for FY
You would see results
19.
sooner if we started January 1st.
Okay. All right. So can we just go around, and if you're in favor of having this on the agenda next week, could you also indicate whether you're looking at it, the larger increase or the longer increase?
So I'm in favor of putting it on the agenda, and I prefer scenario 1, the immediate increase.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Diana?
Yes, same as Alderman Bray. Next week, immediate. I know I have mixed feelings on it, but we've been talking about this for
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alderman Black?
I'd rather wrap this in the budget process, but I'd like to see it as scenario 1 in the budget process.
Right, and I will echo what Alderman Black said. I'm happy with the more immediate increase, but I feel like we spend an awful lot of, we make a lot of decisions to increase things without anything else on the other side of the balance sheet, so. Alderman Painter.
I go for the bigger increase.
But, and next week?
Next week.
Okay.
Scenario 1 next week.
Okay.
I'm going to buck the trend here. I would go with having both options for next week.
Okay.
Not next week.
Okay.
Both options next week is fine by me.
Okay. It sounds like you have a majority of people interested in voting on this next week.
We'll have that prepared for you. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council, for again allowing us to speak on this very important issue. We really do appreciate your time and consideration.
And I'm assuming that that it could be just an amendment next week to say, and I want it to start January 1st. I mean, you would prepare something that would look at May the 1st, but that could be modified.
Yes, that's correct. And Jeff Juergens, who had to leave and couldn't be here tonight, is prepared to go with either one of those. So we've got about 4 scenarios, and we'll work it out that way.
Okay, thank you very much. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Karen.
Thank you, Jim.
Karen,
Oh, yes.
may I ask a question? You raised a point, I think, in some of your comments about this idea of whether or not these would be all new hires become new city employees, or whether or not
Right.
we
That's
might
an
consider
important point to
contracting
me.
some of the engineering work, that type of stuff. I'm not sure I heard maybe that delineation. within this idea that it would be voted on next week. I mean,
You're right.
it's-
We didn't
the way it
clarify
stands
that.
now, those will be all new hires or
That's
or
my
the-
understanding.
The cost would be built in for that. Okay.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Just to clarify on that, my understanding was that we weren't going to be able to hire anybody for a couple of years anyway, so we would have time to have that conversation. Is that wrong?
It currently is built in year one toward the end, once the funding is built up, so that we can, without that, you can't implement some of the projects right away. So it was shown up on the screen last week as kind of it was tiered, it was phased in from a staffing perspective. It wasn't everybody in year one, for example, but it's phased in.
Okay.
Cynical Karen would say that if we don't set that forth right from the beginning, that sometimes that gets lost in history.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, okay, truthful Karen, cynical Karen. Okay. We're going to then move to the last item on our agenda, and we have a budget calendar in front of us, and talking about when we make some of these critical decisions. I think Alderman Burgess had pointed out we haven't prioritized a lot of our capital improvement wish list, and so, Steve, could you lead us through or Patty Lynn, lead us through a conversation on this?
I had Cherry kind of hand out to you which is that's our normal proposed budget cycle. So I would just leave that with you. I know that the questions out there, whether we want to have a separate track for CIP or we can include that in the normal calendar that you have before you. I'm just putting that out there, the dates for your consideration, and if you have any preference of what you might like to see modified, we would love to hear that.
Could you talk a little bit about what actually the details are for the pre-budget presentation?
So City Manager Hales envisioned very much what you were talking about tonight, kind of just going over the major parts of the budget, kind of filling you in on the condition of all parts of the budget so you can kind of look at that holistically, and then have a conversation, make sure everybody has the facts before you guys start to go to your fall retreat, and potentially before we, with enough time before the tax levy, should you want to act on that. Excuse me, sorry.
Let's see, Alderman Howman and Black.
Okay. Thanks for the calendar, Patty Lynn. Two questions. One is, I see the presentation on the estimated tax levy, and I guess my first question would be, how can we talk about the tax levy when we don't have a budget?
And, that's what's interesting about the statutes, because we do that each year. This year, I'm hoping to set the stage for you prior to the discussion of the tax levy. It's always very difficult to talk about the property tax levy well before you have all the expenditure data. Unfortunately, that's state statute and how it comes about.
So, as a follow-up then, I know you folks put in 19-hour days before in preparing the budget, and we've got a February 26th presentation of the proposed budget. Is there any way of getting that before the end of February?
It's certainly possible. We can certainly do some high-level stuff. I think you've seen our budget book. It's about 600 pages long.
I don't know.
So,
I don't know that I'm looking for, down to paper clips and things. But
we always try actually for the second meeting in February, but something usually happens for us in the department, and so we want to make sure when we do get to the proposed budget, it's correct. It has all the right data in it. That's always our goal. I did put that on there to be conservative, that we would hit the second meeting. But we can certainly have, we can get you the crux of, not every line item detailed before then, but we can certainly let you know what the increases are, what we think is happening in all areas prior to that.
Even if it were, this year, next year,
Yeah.
this year, what the proposed was, what it looks like we're going to be spending for fiscal year 18, and then what the proposal is for 19 would be helpful.
And actually, the 5-year projection that we were just talking about, each year we actually do a 5-year budget. That's why it takes so long.
Right.
A 5-year line item budget. So yes, we can get you those assumptions early. I'm in the process of updating the 5-year right now, and in the general fund, and then I move to the other funds. So hopefully, because we know that if our enterprise funds have the ability to impact our general fund, so I will be working on that. I may have it for October our October 16th meeting.
Okay, 'cause by February, we're having to vote on it.
Yeah.
In
We tried.
5 weeks after that. It's like,
Yeah.
it's a lot to digest, and
Our goal is always 60 days, to try to have it to you, so you have 60 days of time to think about it.
okay, thanks.
Councilman Black?
Thank you. And I appreciate seeing this now as opposed to some point later down the road. Having sat up here for a couple cycles now and seen how this process, we intend for it to unfold and how it actually unfolds, there often is a divergence, and a lot of that fault lies up on this side of the dais. So my suggestion would be that we carve out maybe every committee of the whole a half an hour, and I would, when I say be strategic about the budget, that means that we talk about the budget. I've seen Melissa Hahn's priority-based budgeting worksheets.
Yep.
We just pick a topic, maybe every committee of the whole, half an hour, that's what we're talking about. So then when the time comes that we actually come to vote, I don't want to be one of those, the alderman that says, well, I didn't know about this or I wasn't aware. I mean, 600 pages is a lot to digest,
Right.
not only for us, but also the public. And I know that might be a time, that might be a big time burden for staff. But the sooner we get it, the better. Because for some reason, I have this feeling that this is going to be one of the tougher budget cycles that we've worked through. And I'd rather have this be the tougher budget cycle where we're not in a structural deficit than if we kick the can another year and then we really got ourselves a major problem. So my suggestion would be to carve out time. There's a 5th Monday in January. Maybe we put that as just a work session devoted to the budget, because what I want to hear from this group is clear direction. In years past, I've heard some of my colleagues say staff make cuts, but with no explanation on what that is.
Where, yeah.
And I don't want to hear that this year. But I also, want to challenge us that we don't come up with, last-minute questions. I know you've been so great over the years in answering those, 11th hour questions, but let's try to avoid that situation so we can get in front of all that. So basically, when we adopt the budget, hopefully in early April, that it's a no fireworks type approach, because we've talked about it at length. Much like you saw tonight, I've really enjoyed the conversation that we had here. We've talked about these sewer rate fees. We're talking a philosophical increase and how we go about it as opposed to kind of the what. So I appreciate that. But that's my suggestion. We have these committee of the wholes designed for these sorts of things to talk about this stuff. That gives you guys the ability to ask us for feedback, and then for us to provide it. And then if aldermen don't weigh in, then you don't weigh in. So that's my thought. Thank you.
I also think layered into that, we need to figure out a process for prioritizing the capital projects, and to do that sooner rather than later so that you have the opportunity to give us bonding information. I know for the library, for example, they need time to think, if they're not a priority for us, then what? And I assume that that's probably true for any of the other projects that's on that very long list.
Yep.
So that might be something, Steve, that you suggest to David, that he might propose an earlier rather than later process for us to weigh in on the projects, maybe individually through some sort of a voting or something. I don't know. Yeah. Anything else? All right. I guess, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I believe what, David, what are you looking at me like that for?
I know, it's like second, so nothing's happened.
If looks could kill.
Yeah.
I believe at the last committee of the whole, Alderman Sage asked at this committee of the whole to talk about the PSCRB and the process for moving forward. And I was just wondering where that is.
Well, I know that Mayor Renner wants to be involved, definitely wants to be involved in the appointment of the individuals, and I would imagine he'd want to be involved in that conversation as well. I don't know, Steve, do you know any more about, you're right,
We were
Diana.
just talking about.
We did talk
We were
about
talking about
doing
just a
that.
process of how to move forward, because we've got the applications, they've been in for over a month.
A while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Right.
I'm sure my.
You
fellow
are right.
councilmen-
I think we were looking tentatively at this
Yeah.
particular committee of the whole,
just
but,
for the process.
Yes, we had talked about that at staff level, and we essentially were on hold until such time as the mayor and the council decided to bring that forward, and we'll bring it forward when we're ready, but I think the process now is we're waiting for the mayor to decide how he wanted to move forward on it.
Well, but this was to develop the policies and procedures that wrap around how this commission or board will work. You know, what needs to be done on the staff side, what the expectations for time commitments from the individuals who get named to it are likely to be, and just how is it going to move forward? Is that right? Yeah.
We can certainly work on that, and we were kind of thinking that what would happen was when the board was first convened, they would kind of have those items as some of their first discussion items, but maybe to help move that along, we could draft some things up to begin with, kind of for some rough ideas.
Could you just refresh everybody's memory about what it was that you were suggesting? Because
Yeah,
I think we all bought into that.
Starting with my own, I might add. And so, I mean, I think the idea was just to try to lay out, create some line of sight in terms of what the process was going to be, and perhaps be able to identify some milestones along the way. In other words, I mean, I think you know, the appointments. I don't remember the exact process, but I mean, I know there's background work that has to happen. Background checks have to happen with the people who.
And I think that has happened.
Okay. I guess I was just trying to understand kind of what the sequence of events, you know, instead of talking about the process, what were the next 4 or 5 steps that would have to happen, and perhaps any kind of timing that might be needed between those steps, or what perhaps additional time that staff might need for individual steps or something like that.
And the training and.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
it's like the Transportation Commission. We create it, we name them, and there's that lag time where we decide, you know, where there's work that's done to make it
appropriate training has
an
to be
effective
developed.
board. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Steve, if you could share that with David.
I will. Thank you, I will, and we've talked a little bit about that, but now this helps us with a little more guidance of how to move forward, and I'll have that discussion with you.
Okay, thank you. Is your motion still good?
Yes, very much so.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, have a good evening.